I can still hear their laughter, sharp, dismissive, cutting through the warm air of that pristine entryway like shards of glass. "You must be the driver?" Richard Parker asked, his smile condescending as he looked me up and down in my faded jeans and old wool coat. The heat of shame crawled up my neck as I stood there, a 63-year-old woman being sized up and found wanting at first glance. "No, I'm Eleanor, Ethan's mother," I replied, my voice steadier than my heart. The silence that followed was worse than the laughter, my son's mortified expression, his fiancée's poorly concealed smirk, her parents' bewildered assessment of my simple attire. In that frozen moment, I realized I was being measured by the fabric covering my body, not the life I'd lived within it. Let me tell you what led to that moment. For 40 years, I've called Burlington, Vermont, home. Our house overlooking Lake Champlain isn't luxurious by modern standards, but it holds the memories of a life dedicated to things I believed mattered. The early morning light spilling across the oak floors my husband Thomas had installed himself, the wall of bookshelves sagging slightly under the weight of literature I'd taught for 35 years at the university, the scent of pine and lemon oil that lingered even 2 years after Thomas had left this world, taken by a silent heart attack one ordinary Tuesday morning. I'd spent that particular afternoon standing in front of my bedroom mirror, a ritual I rarely bothered with anymore. My reflection showed what I expected: silver-streaked hair cut in a practical bob, laugh lines around eyes that had seen both joy and sorrow, hands slightly knotted from decades of turning pages and grading papers. I wasn't beautiful in the conventional sense, but Thomas had always said my face told our story, one of purpose, contentment, and the quiet pride of a life well lived. When the phone rang, I wasn't expecting news that would change everything. My son Ethan's voice bubbled with an excitement I hadn't heard since he was a boy discovering his father's workshop for the first time. "Mom, I've asked Vanessa to marry me. She said yes." My heart swelled and contracted simultaneously, joy for my only child finding love, grief that Thomas wasn't here to share this moment, and something else, a flutter of apprehension I couldn't quite name. "That's wonderful news, sweetheart," I said, meaning it despite the whisper of unease. "Tell me about her family." His description painted a picture so different from our world that I struggled to imagine Ethan fitting into it. Vanessa Parker, 29, came from what he called old Vermont money, though in my experience, truly old money in Vermont was quiet, unassuming, and often wore the same fishing vest for 20 years. Her father, Richard, was a retired investment banker. Her mother, Diane, chaired charity galas. They owned a vacation home in Stowe and another in Naples, Florida. "They want to meet you, Mom, Friday night at their Stowe house. Just dinner, nothing fancy." Nothing fancy. Those words would echo with bitter irony later. The day of the dinner arrived with a sky heavy with steel-gray clouds that matched my restless mood. I stood at my closet, suddenly aware of how little I'd updated my wardrobe since retirement. Teaching literature had never required fashion-forward thinking. Comfortable slacks, sweaters, sensible shoes. After Thomas died, shopping for clothes seemed frivolous, an unnecessary reminder that I was dressing for a world without him in it. I chose what I would have worn to any family gathering, clean, well-kept clothes that represented the person I was, faded jeans that had softened with years of wear, a moss green sweater I'd purchased at an artisan fair, my old wool coat with the slightly frayed cuffs, no jewelry except my wedding band and a silver brooch Thomas had crafted for our 25th anniversary, a small bird in flight. As I backed my 12-year-old Volvo out of the driveway, the wind stirred the leaves of the oak tree Thomas had planted when Ethan was born. The rustle seemed to whisper a warning I was too preoccupied to hear. The drive to Stowe took me through landscapes that had become so familiar they were almost invisible. Rolling hills giving way to mountains, the occasional farm with its weathered red barn, small towns where I'd once brought students for poetry readings or historical tours. Vermont in late autumn had a stark beauty. Trees stripped bare, the world preparing for winter's stillness. I found the Parkers' home easily enough, though home seemed an inadequate word for the sprawling property that appeared around a curve in the private drive. Situated to maximize views of the mountains, the house rose like something from a glossy magazine, all stone and glass and perfectly placed outdoor lighting. Decorative torches flanked the entrance, flickering against the early evening darkness. I parked my Volvo between a gleaming black Range Rover and a sports car I couldn't identify. The contrast made me pause, my hand on the door handle. a moment of hesitation that I should have heeded. But I reminded myself that I was meeting my future daughter-in-law's family. Surely the warmth of that connection would transcend whatever superficial differences existed between us. The door opened before I could ring the bell. Vanessa stood there, elegant in a dress that probably cost more than my monthly pension. Her blonde hair was styled in loose waves, her makeup flawless, her smile practiced. Behind her stood a couple I assumed were her parents, both tall, fit, expensively maintained, the kind of people who aged with the help of personal trainers and discreet cosmetic procedures. That's when it happened, the moment that would divide my life into before and after. "You must be the driver?" Richard asked, his voice carrying that particular tone wealthy men use when addressing service. Personnel, polite but dismissive. After I corrected him, the silence was broken by muffled laughter from Vanessa and a younger woman who appeared in the hallway. Alexandra, her sister, I would later learn. Ethan emerged from somewhere inside, his face a mask of embarrassment. "Mom, you came like that?" The words fell between us like stones. I felt something inside me crack, not dramatically, but with the quiet devastation of ice breaking on a spring lake. My son, who had grown up in a home where character was valued above appearance, was ashamed of me. "I thought it was a family dinner, not a formal event," I replied, summoning the composure that 35 years of teaching had instilled. "Well, come in," Diane said with artificial brightness. "We have so much to talk about." The interior of the home was even more impressive than its exterior. Soaring ceilings, artwork that even my untrained eye recognized as valuable, furniture that looked more sculptural than functional. I was led to a sitting area where a fire burned in a marble fireplace that had likely never known the honest work of heating a home. Richard poured drinks into crystal glasses, handing me a wine I didn't ask for, but accepted to have something to do with my hands. The conversation that followed was a masterclass in subtle degradation. "So, Eleanor, Ethan mentioned you were a teacher?" Richard's emphasis on the past tense felt deliberate. "Yes, literature. I retired 3 years ago." "Interesting. And your husband?" "Thomas passed away 2 years ago. He owned a woodworking business." The glance between Richard and Diane spoke volumes. "Manual labor," their expressions said. "How quaint." Honest work," Richard commented, as if bestowing a compliment on something inherently inferior. Throughout dinner, served on china that probably had its own insurance policy, I felt myself shrinking. The conversation orbited around topics designed to establish hierarchy: exclusive vacations, investment portfolios, connections to people whose names were meant to impress. Alexandra spoke of her work at a Manhattan gallery. Richard casually mentioned knowing senators and CEOs. But what wounded me most deeply was watching Ethan. My thoughtful, unpretentious son had transformed in this environment. He used financial terminology I'd never heard him speak before. He boasted of career achievements he'd never mentioned to me. He laughed too loudly at Richard's jokes and nodded too eagerly at Diane's observations. "He's really flourishing at the firm since he started dating Vanessa," Richard noted, swirling amber liquid in his glass. "She has a good eye for untapped potential." The implication was clear. My son was a project, a rough stone that needed the Parker family's polishing. When dessert arrived, Diane steered the conversation toward wedding plans. "We're thinking next summer, at our place on the Maine coast, nothing extravagant, just intimate, maybe 200 tapes." People. 200 strangers constituted intimate in their world, another reality that wasn't mine. "Would you be able to wear something more appropriate for the occasion, Eleanor?" Diane asked with manufactured sweetness. "Perhaps we could do a shopping day together. I know stylists who work wonders with mature women." The delicate laughter from Alexandra and Vanessa pierced me like needles. Ethan didn't defend me. He remained silent, studying his wine glass as if it held answers. Then Richard mentioned something about Thomas's woodworking. "That little shop in Burlington, right? I've heard of it, rustic furniture, if I'm not mistaken." "Actually," I replied calmly, "Thomas's pieces are in design galleries in Boston and New York. He received the National Craftsmanship Award 3 times. Richard frowned, confused. "Crawford Artisan Furniture? That was your husband's company?" "It was. Now it's mine." The silence that followed carried a different weight. I watched Alexandra swallow hard. "Wait," she said. "I have a Crawford coffee table. It costs 3 months' salary." "Thomas always said the value is in the care for details, not the price tag," I replied, allowing myself a small smile. Diane leaned forward. But you arrived in an old Volvo wearing clothes. Simple? I completed her thought. I grew up believing that character shows through actions, not appearances. The dinner ended with palpable tension. On the drive home, through a fine rain that blurred the headlights of passing cars, I reflected on how my son had changed. His silence during their mockery hurt more than any words could have. 3 days passed without word from Ethan. When he finally knocked on my door, he looked defeated. "I'm sorry, Mom. I should have defended you." We sat on the back porch where the lake reflected the cloudy sky. The scent of fallen apples from our small orchard filled the air. "Why didn't you tell them about the business, about who we really are?" I asked. Ethan sighed. "I met Vanessa at a business event. She assumed I was just a sales manager. When she discovered my actual position in the company, she was already enchanted by what she believed was a story of overcoming odds. I never found the right moment to correct the narrative. And what about me? Why did you let me be humiliated? Because I was ashamed myself, not of you, of me, of the man I've become to impress them." This confession opened a door I thought was locked between us. Ethan revealed how, after Thomas's death, he felt the weight of running the company, of preserving his father's legacy. The fear of failure pushed him toward relationships that offered external validation. Vanessa likes the man I pretended to be, an ambitious, calculating man who fits into her world. A week later, we received a formal invitation to dinner at our home. The Parkers wanted to properly meet the Crawford family. I hesitated, but accepted. On the appointed day, I changed nothing. The house remained simple, comfortable, with furniture Thomas had crafted and books lining every wall. I dressed as I always did, but I opened the doors to the office where we kept the awards, photos with celebrities who purchased our pieces, articles about Thomas. The Parkers arrived promptly. The shock on their faces when they saw the lake view, the collection of modern art that Thomas and I had gathered over the years, was almost comical. "This is your home?" Diane asked, her eyes traveling over paintings by recognized artists. "Yes," I answered simply. "Modest, but ours." During dinner, served on the dining table that was Thomas's final project, the dynamics shifted completely. Richard was less arrogant, Diane exceptionally quiet. Alexandra and Vanessa seemed curious, almost respectful. After the meal, I led them to the workshop Thomas had converted from an old barn. There, among the smell of wood and varnish, I told the true story of the Crawfords, how Thomas and I built everything from nothing, how we refused million-dollar offers to maintain the artisanal essence of the business, how we chose to live simply despite being able to afford much more. "That brooch," Vanessa said, pointing to the small silver bird on my chest. "It's beautiful." It was the first gift Thomas gave me when we started dating. He made it himself when he was still learning his craft. At the end of the evening, as the Parkers were leaving, Vanessa stayed behind. "I've never met anyone like you," she said, with a voice different from before. "I always believed that people's value was in what they owned, in what they appeared to be." Her eyes shimmered with unshed tears. "My parents taught me that." 3 months later, Ethan and Vanessa canceled their engagement. The decision was mutual, they explained, incompatibility of values, different paths. On a quiet Sunday, Vanessa appeared alone at my door. She carried a bouquet of wildflowers. "May I come in? I'd like to hear more about literature, about teaching, about building something that lasts longer than appearances." That afternoon, as the sun painted the lake gold, I realized the true victory wasn't in proving my worth to the Parkers. It was in remaining true to myself when the world demanded I conform. Today, a year later, Ethan is engaged again, to Rachel, a 31-year-old veterinarian he met when he took our old cat for a checkup. Vanessa visits our home regularly, not as a daughter-in-law, but as a friend, as a student learning to value what truly matters. And me? I still wear my simple clothes, my silver brooch, carrying Thomas's memories, and the certainty that, even when the world judges us by our cover, the true value lies in the pages of the story we choose to live. But that night, as I drove home from the Parkers' mansion, I didn't know any of this was coming. I only felt the weight of my son's betrayal and my own inadequacy pressing down on me like the darkening sky. Have you ever been judged by your appearance rather than your character? The pain cuts deeper when it comes from those who should know better, doesn't it? The days after that dinner were some of the loneliest I'd experienced since Thomas's death. I moved through my routines, morning coffee on the porch, afternoon walks along the lake, evenings with books that had been my companions for decades. But everything felt hollow. When I looked at Thomas's empty chair across from mine, I imagined what he would say about our son's transformation. "He's lost, Ellie." I could almost hear him say in that gentle voice that always steadied me, "He's trying to find his way without a compass." The phone remained silent. No call from Ethan, no apology, no explanation. I picked it up a dozen times to call him, but pride or hurt or some combination of both stopped my fingers from dialing. In our family, we had always talked through our problems, faced difficulties together. This silence between us was foreign territory. One morning, I found myself in Thomas's workshop. I hadn't spent much time there since his death. The memories were too vivid, the absence too palpable. Dust had settled on his workbench, but the scent of cedar and pine still lingered. I ran my fingers over his tools, each one worn to fit his hand perfectly. In the corner stood an unfinished rocking chair, the last project he'd started before his heart gave out. The wood was maple, honey-colored and smooth where he'd already worked it, rough and full of potential where he hadn't. I sat on his stool, picked up a piece of sandpaper, and began to smooth the armrest. I had watched Thomas work for 40 years. I'd absorbed his movements, his patience, his respect for the material. I wasn't a craftsman like him, but I understood the process, how to work with the grain, not against it, how to reveal the beauty already present in the wood. Hours passed. The physical work felt good, purposeful, honest. By mid-afternoon, my hands were sore and my back ached, but the armrest gleamed. I realized then that I had been approaching my problem with Ethan all wrong. I couldn't force a reconciliation any more than Thomas could force maple to become oak. I needed to work with what was there, to find the beauty hidden beneath the surface. That evening, I called our company's office. Jessica, our office manager who had been with us for 15 years, answered, "Eleanor, it's so good to hear your voice. How are you holding up?" "I've been better, Jess. Tell me, how is Ethan doing at work?" Her hesitation told me everything before she spoke a word. "He's changed, Eleanor. The clients still love him, but the staff is walking on eggshells. He's brought in consultants to modernize our approach. He talks about scaling up, expanding markets." "All things his father avoided deliberately," I said quietly. "Exactly. Thomas always said our strength was in remaining small enough to maintain quality. Ethan seems to have different ideas." After we hung up, I sat on the porch watching darkness settle over the lake. Loons called in the distance, their mournful cries echoing across the water. I thought about legacy, what Thomas had built, what he had valued, what he had wanted to pass on, not just a successful business, but a philosophy. Create with integrity, live with purpose, value relationships over profit. Somewhere along the way, Ethan had lost sight of these principles, or perhaps he had never fully embraced them to begin with. The thought hurt, but facing it squarely felt necessary. The next morning, I drove to our company headquarters, a converted textile mill in Burlington's South End Arts District. I hadn't been there in months, not since the memorial service the staff had organized for Thomas. Walking through the front doors felt like stepping back in time. The showroom displayed our signature pieces, dining tables with live edges, chairs with curves that followed the human form perfectly, cabinets with joinery so precise they would last generations. New signs had been added, Crawford luxury collections, and bespoke design services. The price tags attached to the furniture were nearly double what they had been during Thomas's time. I felt a tightening in my chest that had nothing to do with grief. Employees nodded respectfully as I passed. Some looked surprised to see me, others relieved. I made my way to what had been Thomas's office, now Ethan's. Through the glass wall, I could see my son on the phone, gesturing emphatically, his face set in an expression I didn't recognize. Harder, more calculating than I remembered. When he saw me, shock registered briefly before he composed himself. He ended his call abruptly and opened the door. "Mom, this is unexpected." "I should have called first," I said, suddenly uncertain of my place in this space that had once felt like an extension of our home. "No, it's fine. Come in." He cleared his throat, straightening papers on what had been his father's desk. Thomas's desk had always been cluttered with sketches, wood samples, notes from clients. Ethan's was organized with military precision. "What brings you here?" I looked at my son, really looked at him. His suit was tailored, expensive. His watch gleamed on his wrist. His hair was styled differently than the casual way he'd worn it all his life. He looked successful, polishing, and completely unlike the boy I had raised. "I've been thinking about your father's rocking chair," I said, "the one he never finished." Confusion crossed Ethan's face. "What about it?" "I started working on it yesterday. I'm not as skilled as he was, but I understand the principles." "Mom, we have master craftsmen who could finish it for you. Just say the word." "That's not the point, Ethan." I sat down across from him. "Your father believed in doing things himself, in understanding the material, respecting its nature." Ethan's expression closed. This is about the dinner at the Parkers." I said I was sorry. "This isn't about one dinner. It's about who we are, who you're becoming." His jaw tightened. "I'm growing the business, Mom. Dad was content to keep things small, artisanal. That worked for his generation. But we're living in a different world now." "Are we? Has human nature changed so much? Do people no longer value authenticity, craftsmanship, integrity?" "People value status, Mom. The Parkers understand that. Vanessa understands that." I felt a chill at his words. "Is that what you value now?" He didn't answer directly. Instead, he stood and walked to the window overlooking the workshop floor. "Do you know what our revenue has been since I implemented the new pricing structure? We've increased by 30% in 6 months. And what about job satisfaction? What about the relationships with clients who have been with us for decades? What about creating furniture that average families can pass down through generations? We can't run a business on sentimentality." The words hung between us like a wall. I realized then that I was looking at a stranger wearing my son's face. The gulf between us felt unbridgeable in that moment. "I should go," I said, rising. "I've taken enough of your time." As I turned to leave, Ethan called after me. "Mom, wait." There was a note of the old Ethan in his voice, uncertain, seeking approval. "We're having a company dinner next Friday, celebrating our new direction. It would mean a lot if you came." I paused at the door. "Will the Parkers be there?" "Yes, and some potential investors." I nodded slowly. "Then I'll be there." For the next week, I divided my time between Thomas's workshop and his office at home. In the workshop, I continued working on the rocking chair, my hands growing more confident with each passing day. In the office, I reviewed company documents, financial statements, client histories, all the paperwork Thomas had kept meticulously organized. What I found confirmed what I already suspected. The company was making more money, yes, but at a cost. Long-term clients were placing fewer orders. Employee turnover had increased. The materials being used were still high quality, but the time spent on each piece had decreased significantly. On the day of the company dinner, I stood once again before my closet. This time, my choice was deliberate, strategic. I selected a simple black dress, one I'd worn to faculty dinners at the university, and paired it with Thomas's silver brooch. I added a cashmere wrap he'd given me for our 35th anniversary. My only other accessories were my wedding band and a pair of pearl earrings that had belonged to my mother. Simple, elegant, authentic. The dinner was being held at an upscale restaurant in downtown Burlington, the kind of place where the lighting is designed to flatter and the menu doesn't list prices. As I handed my keys to the valet, I noticed the lineup of luxury. Cars already parked. Taking a deep breath, I straightened my shoulders and walked in. The private dining room was filled with people in expensive attire. I recognized our longtime employees looking slightly uncomfortable in formal wear. New faces, consultants, investors, business connections, moved with the easy confidence of those accustomed to such settings. And there, at the center of it all, were Ethan and Vanessa, holding court with her parents. Richard Parker saw me first, his expression of recognition quickly masked by social politeness. Diane's eyes widened slightly, then narrowed as she took in my simple attire. Vanessa whispered something to Ethan, who turned and spotted me. "Mom," he said, coming over, "you made it." His eyes darted to my outfit, relieved that I hadn't shown up in jeans, but still assessing whether I met the standard. "I wouldn't miss it," I replied, kissing his cheek. He led me to their table, making introductions to people whose names blurred together. I nodded, smiled, shook hands. When we reached the Parkers, Richard extended his hand with exaggerated courtesy. "Eleanor, lovely to see you again. You look nice." "Thank you, Richard. How kind of you to notice." Dinner progressed with the expected rhythm of such events. Drinks, appetizers, main course, each accompanied by carefully orchestrated conversation. I watched as Ethan presented his vision for Crawford Artisan Furniture, except he called it Crawford Luxury Design now. He spoke of exclusive collections, limited editions, partnerships with high-end retailers. The investors nodded approvingly. The Parkers beamed with pride. Our longtime employees exchanged glances I couldn't quite interpret. When dessert arrived, Ethan clinked his glass for attention. "I'd like to propose a toast," he announced, "to new beginnings and exciting partnerships." Glasses raised around the room. I lifted mine as well, my eyes meeting Ethan's across the table. "And," he continued, "I'd like to share some news. As of next month, Crawford Luxury Design will be opening a showroom in Manhattan. This represents a significant step in our growth strategy." Applause followed. Richard Parker clapped Ethan on the back. Vanessa squeezed his arm adoringly. "Additionally," Ethan said, his voice carrying the practiced cadence of a prepared speech, "we've accepted an offer from Lux Home Enterprises to acquire a controlling interest in our company." The room went silent. Our employees froze, glasses halfway to lips. "This partnership will allow us to scale operations while maintaining our commitment to quality," Ethan continued smoothly. "The Crawford name will continue as a premium brand under the Lux umbrella." More applause, though notably not from our longtime staff. I sat perfectly still, my face a mask of composure that hid the storm within. Thomas had been approached by conglomerates multiple times throughout his career. He had always declined, valuing independence above expansion. When the formal part of the evening concluded, people broke into small groups, networking, congratulating Ethan. I found myself approached by Jessica, our office manager. "Did you know about this, Eleanor?" she asked quietly. "No," I replied. "I didn't. Thomas would be heartbroken." Her voice caught. "We all thought Ethan understood what made this company special." Before I could respond, Richard Parker joined us, champagne glass in hand. "Eleanor, your son is quite the businessman. You must be proud." Jessica excused herself, leaving me alone with Richard. "Actually, I'm surprised," I said evenly. "This direction is contrary to everything my husband built." Richard chuckled. "Times change. Businesses adapt or die. Sentiment doesn't pay the bills. Neither does selling your soul." The words came out before I could censor them. His smile hardened. "I think you'll find that it pays quite well, actually. Ethan understands this. Vanessa has been good for him, helped him see beyond the limitations of his upbringing." The insult was delivered with such casual cruelty that it momentarily took my breath away. Before I could respond, Diane joined us, her smile brittle. "Eleanor, we've been meaning to ask you about the wedding. We're thinking a small family dinner before the ceremony. Just immediate family. Would that work for you?" "Define immediate family," I said. Diane blinked. "Well, us, Ethan, Vanessa, Alexandra, and you, of course." "What about Thomas's brother and his family? My sister? Our cousins?" "Oh," Diane's smile strained further. "We were thinking of keeping it very intimate. The actual wedding will have plenty of guests." "I see. And what role do you envision for me at this wedding?" Richard and Diane exchanged glances. "The traditional mother of the groom duties, naturally," Richard said. "Showing up, looking presentable, not making a scene." "How generous of you to include me," I replied, my voice level despite the anger building inside. As they moved away to mingle with other guests, I found myself alone at the table. Across the room, Ethan was deep in conversation with men in expensive suits, the investors, presumably. Vanessa hung on his arm, her diamond engagement ring catching the light every time she gestured. I thought about leaving, about walking out the door and letting Ethan continue down this path he'd chosen. But as I watched him, really watched him, I saw something beneath the polished exterior, a tension in his shoulders, a flicker of uncertainty when he thought no one was looking. My son was still in there somewhere, beneath the veneer of the man the Parkers wanted him to be. Instead of leaving, I made my way to the small stage where a piano sat unused. In my younger days, I had played quite well, another fact about me that Ethan seemed to have forgotten. I sat down, adjusted the bench, and began to play. The opening notes of Debussy's Clair de Lune silenced the room. Heads turned, conversations paused. I kept my eyes on the keys, letting the music speak. It was Thomas's favorite piece, one I had played on quiet evenings when Ethan was small, when our family was whole. As the final notes faded, I looked up to find Ethan standing near the piano, his expression unreadable. Behind him, the Parkers watched with barely concealed annoyance at the interruption. "I didn't know you were going to perform, Mom," Ethan said, his voice tight. "There's a lot you seem to have forgotten," I replied softly. The drive home that night was long and dark. Rain had started again, drumming on the roof of my old Volvo. I thought about Thomas, about the company he'd built, about the son we'd raised together. I thought about the Parkers and their world of appearances, and I thought about the unfinished rocking chair waiting in the workshop. By the time I reached home, I knew what I needed to do. The next morning, I called my lawyer, Harold Stevenson, who had been Thomas's friend since college. I explained the situation and what I wanted to accomplish. He listened without interruption, then sighed heavily. "Eleanor, are you sure about this? It's unconventional." "I'm sure, Harold. Can you make it happen?" "I'll need to review the company bylaws, Thomas's will, the current ownership structure. But if what you're telling me is accurate, then yes, I believe I can." For the next 2 weeks, I worked with Harold to understand the legal intricacies of what we were attempting. I also spent hours each day in Thomas's workshop, finishing the rocking chair. The work was therapeutic, focusing on each detail, honoring the wood's natural beauty, creating something meant to last generations. Ethan called twice during this time. Both conversations were brief, superficial. He mentioned the upcoming sale to Lux Home Enterprises, the plans for the Manhattan showroom, the wedding preparations. I listened, offered non-committal responses, and didn't reveal my own activities. The night before the scheduled signing with Lux, I finished the rocking chair. It wasn't perfect. Thomas would have found a dozen small flaws, but it was honest work. I ran my hands over the smooth arms, the gentle curve of the back, and felt a sense of completion that had eluded me since Thomas's death. The next morning, I dressed carefully in a tailored pantsuit that I'd purchased for the occasion, simple but elegant, in a deep blue that Thomas always said matched my eyes. I drove to the company headquarters, the rocking chair secured in the back of my station wagon. The conference room was set up for the signing ceremony. Representatives from Lux Home Enterprises sat on one side of the table, their legal team flanking them. Ethan and his new business advisors sat opposite. The Parkers were there as observers, Vanessa proudly at Ethan's side. No one had expected me to attend. When I walked in, carrying the rocking chair with Harold Stevenson behind me, the room went silent. "Mom?" Ethan stood, confusion evident. "What are you doing here?" I placed the rocking chair at the head of the table. "I brought something that belongs here." Harold stepped forward, placing a folder on the table. "Before these proceedings continue, there are some legal matters that need to be addressed." The lead counsel for Lux frowned. "And you are?" "Harold Stevenson, attorney for Eleanor Crawford and the Crawford Family Trust." "What family trust?" Ethan asked, his face paling. Harold opened the folder. "When Thomas Crawford died, he left 51% of the company to his wife, Eleanor, 25% to his son, Ethan. The remaining 24% is held in the Crawford Family Trust, which stipulates that the company must remain family-owned and operated according to the principles established by its founder." The Lux representatives exchanged glances. Their lead counsel leaned forward. "We were informed that Ethan Crawford had authority to negotiate this sale." "He has authority to negotiate them," I said, stepping forward. "He does not have authority to sell without my consent as majority shareholder." Ethan's face had gone from pale to flushed. "Mom, what are you doing? This deal is worth millions." "Some things are worth more than money, Ethan." Richard Parker stood, his expression thunderous. "This is ridiculous. Ethan, control your mother." The phrase hung in the air like a slap. I turned to Richard slowly, my voice steady. "Mr. Parker, I've been polite until now out of respect for my son's feelings, but let me be clear. No one controls me, especially not men who mistake money for character." "How dare you?" Diane began, but I continued. "I dare because I've earned the right. While you were collecting vacation homes, my husband and I were building something authentic, something that matters." I turned to the Lux representatives. "Gentlemen, I apologize for the confusion. Crawford Artisan Furniture is not for sale. Not today, not ever." The lead negotiator from Lux closed his portfolio. "I believe we're done here. Mr. Crawford, call us if your situation changes." With that, they filed out, leaving us in a silence thick with tension. Ethan stared at me, betrayal and anger warring in his expression. "Do you have any idea what you've done? The opportunity you've just thrown away? I've preserved your father's legacy, our family's legacy. At what cost? My future? My happiness? Is this what makes you happy, Ethan? Becoming someone you're not to impress people who value wealth over worth? Vanessa stepped forward, her voice cold. Ethan has ambitions beyond a small-town furniture company. He deserves better than being trapped by his father's outdated vision. I looked at this woman who would be my daughter-in-law and saw no love in her eyes when she looked at my son. Only calculation, assessment of potential. It broke my heart, not for myself, but for Ethan. My husband's vision was never small, Ms. Parker. It was human-scaled. There's a difference. Richard put his arm around his daughter. Come, Vanessa, Ethan. We should discuss this situation privately. As they turned to leave, I called after them. Before you go, I have a wedding gift for you. I gestured to the rocking chair. I finished it myself, not perfectly, but with love and respect for the craft. Vanessa looked at the chair with undisguised disdain. It doesn't match our aesthetic. No, I said quietly. I don't suppose it does. After they left, I remained in the conference room with Harold, my hand resting on the smooth wood of the rocking chair Thomas had begun and I had completed. The room felt suddenly larger, emptier, but somehow cleaner, as if a fever had broken. Are you all right, Eleanor? Harold asked gently. No, I answered honestly, but I will be. In the days that followed, I expected anger from Ethan, recriminations, arguments, perhaps even legal challenges. Instead, there was silence, complete and absolute. He didn't call, didn't come to the house. Vanessa returned her engagement ring via courier, with a terse note saying she couldn't marry into a family with such limited horizons. I threw myself into the company, working with Jessica to reassure our employees, reconnect with longtime clients, and reaffirm our commitment to Thomas's vision. The work was exhausting but fulfilling. For the first time since his death, I felt connected to him, to the life we'd built together. 3 weeks after the failed signing, on a Sunday morning when the lake was still as glass, I heard a car in the driveway. Through the window, I watched Ethan get out of his BMW, stand uncertainly for a moment, then walk slowly to the front door. When I opened it, the first thing I noticed was how tired he looked. Not just physically exhausted, but soul-weary. His expensive clothes seemed to hang on him, as if he'd lost weight. "Can I come in?" he asked, his voice rough. I stepped aside wordlessly, leading him to the kitchen where sunlight streamed through windows that faced the lake. I poured coffee into the mug that had always been his, dark blue with a chip on the handle from when he'd dropped it at age 12. He wrapped his hands around the mug but didn't drink. "The Parkers are moving to Florida permanently. Vanessa is going with them." I nodded, waiting. She said she couldn't be with someone who lacked vision, who was content to remain small. "And what do you think?" I asked. Ethan looked up, his eyes red-rimmed. "I think I lost myself, Mom. Somewhere between trying to fill Dad's shoes and trying to become what Vanessa wanted, I forgot who I was." The confession broke something open between us. For the next hour, my son talked more honestly than he had in years, about his grief over Thomas's death, his fear of failing the company, his insecurity around the Parkers and their world of easy wealth and social connections, how Vanessa had made him feel both special and perpetually inadequate. "I was going to sell Dad's company," he said finally, his voice cracking. "Everything he built, everything he believed in. For what? To impress my future in-laws?" I reached across the table and took his hand. "Your father wasn't perfect, Ethan. Neither am I. Neither are you. We all lose our way sometimes. How do I find it again?" I thought about this question, so simple and yet so profound. You start by remembering who you are, not who others want you to be. That afternoon, we walked to Thomas's workshop together. I showed Ethan the rocking chair I'd completed, pointing out my amateur mistakes, the places where my lack of skill showed, but also the care, the attention, the respect for the material. "It's beautiful, Mom," he said, running his hand along the arm. "Dad would be proud. He would be proud of you too, Ethan, not for the deals you make or the money you earn, but for the man you choose to be." In the months that followed, healing came slowly. Ethan moved back to Burlington from the luxury apartment he'd rented to be closer to the Parkers in Stowe. He recommitted himself to the company, not as a business to be scaled and sold, but as a legacy to be honored and evolved thoughtfully. The rocking chair took a place of honor in our showroom, with a small plaque, "Begun by Thomas Crawford, completed by Eleanor Crawford. A family's work is never finished." Customers often asked about it, which gave us the opportunity to talk about craftsmanship, about patience, about the value of things made to last. Some understood immediately. Others, like the Parkers, never would. 1 year after that disastrous dinner in Stowe, I received an unexpected letter. It was from Alexandra Parker, Vanessa's younger sister. She wrote that after witnessing what happened between our families, she had begun questioning her own values. She had left her job at the prestigious gallery and was now working with a nonprofit that taught woodworking to at-risk youth. Your dignity in the face of my family's rudeness showed me another way to be, she wrote. I keep thinking about that silver bird brooch you wore and how it represented something real, something made with love and skill, not just purchased to impress. I wrote back, inviting her to visit if she ever returned to Vermont. To my surprise, she did, arriving on a crisp autumn day when the maples around our house were blazing red and gold. She was different from her sister, more thoughtful, less concerned with appearances. She asked intelligent questions about Thomas's work, about teaching, about building a meaningful life. Before she left, I gave her a small wooden box that Thomas had made early in his career. It wasn't perfect. You could see where his technique was still developing, but it was honest work. "This is too valuable," she protested. "The value isn't in what it would sell for," I told her. "It's in remembering that we all start somewhere, that mastery comes from patience and practice, that imperfection is part of the journey." 2 years after the confrontation in the conference room, Ethan met Sarah at a craft fair where we were exhibiting. She was a potter, her hands strong and capable, her laugh quick and genuine. When he brought her home to meet me, there was no pretense, no performance, just two people getting to know each other authentically. On their wedding day, held in our backyard with the lake as witness, I wore a simple dress and Thomas's silver brooch. Sarah's parents, a high school science teacher and a nurse, welcomed me with genuine warmth. The celebration was small, joyful, real. As I watched my son dance with his bride, I felt Thomas's presence beside me. Not in some mystical sense, but in the legacy he'd left, in the furniture that surrounded us, in the values that had finally found their way back to our son, in the love that continued even after he was gone. The rocking chair sat on the porch where Sarah's grandmother rested during the celebration. Her gnarled hands caressed the wood that Thomas had started and I had finished. Her eyes closed in appreciation of its comfort. Have you ever noticed how the most valuable things in life can't be measured in dollars? How the richest legacies are the ones that shape hearts and minds, not bank accounts? 5 years have passed since that first dinner with the Parkers. Our company continues to thrive, not by expanding into luxury markets or selling to conglomerates, but by remaining true to Thomas's vision of creating furniture that serves both function and beauty, that's built to last generations. Ethan and Sarah have a 3-year-old daughter now, named Thomasina after her grandfather. She already shows signs of his patience, his attention to detail, his appreciation for the grain of wood and the shape of things. Sometimes I find her in the workshop, sitting on a stool, watching her father work with the same intensity Thomas once did. Alexandra Parker visits occasionally. She's married now, to a teacher she met through her nonprofit work. They live simply, purposefully. Her parents rarely speak to her, she says. They consider her choice of lifestyle a rejection of everything they provided. "It was," she admitted once, as we sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the lake copper and gold, "but it was also an embrace of something better. As for me, I've found a new rhythm to my days." I teach a literature course at the community college, just one class, focusing on stories about legacy and identity. I serve on the board of our company, offering guidance when asked, but giving Ethan room to lead in his own way. And I've started writing a book about Thomas, about our life together, about the philosophy that guided his hands and his heart. Sometimes, on quiet evenings when the house feels too empty, I sit in the rocking chair and feel the smooth wood beneath my palms. I think about value, what it means, how it's measured, who decides. I think about the Parkers in their Florida mansion, surrounded by expensive things, but missing the richness of authentic connection. I think about my son, finding his way back to himself after nearly losing his way entirely. And I think about that night in the Parkers' entryway, when Richard mistook me for the driver and laughed at my simple clothes. How that moment of humiliation became a turning point, not just for me, but for all of us. If he hadn't laughed, Would I have found the strength to stand up for Thomas's legacy? Would Ethan have recognized how far he'd strayed from our family's values? Would Alexandra have questioned her own path? Sometimes the wounds that cut deepest also open us to the greatest healing. Last week, I received a letter from Vanessa. She's divorced now, she wrote. Her brief marriage to a hedge fund manager had ended when the market turned and his fortune diminished. She found herself wondering if there might be room in her life for the lessons she'd begun to learn during our brief acquaintance. I keep thinking about that rocking chair, she wrote, how you finished it yourself, not perfectly, but with love. I'm starting to understand what you meant about value being in the care, not the price tag. I wrote back, not with judgment or triumph, but with the simple truth I've come to embrace more fully with each passing year. We are all unfinished works. The beauty lies not in perfection, but in the willingness to continue shaping ourselves with honesty and purpose. This evening, as I sit on the porch watching fireflies rise from the grass like earthbound stars, I wear my faded jeans and Thomas's old sweater. His silver bird brooch catches the last light of day. I am 68 years old now. My hands show the map of my years, the books I've opened, the students I've guided, the wood I've shaped, the life I've lived. I am not wealthy by the Parkers' standards. I don't vacation in exclusive resorts or wear designer clothes or move in influential circles, but I am rich in ways they may never comprehend, in authenticity, in purpose, in the knowledge that I remained true to myself when it would have been easier to conform. The loons call across the darkening lake, their voices haunting and true. Inside, photographs of Thomas watch over our home, his smile honest, his eyes kind, his hands always slightly rough from his work. In the workshop, the lights are on. Ethan is teaching Thomasina how to sand wood with the grain, his voice patient as Thomas's had been with him. And I understand now, with the clarity that only time can bring, that the greatest act of courage is not in grand gestures or dramatic stands. It's in the quiet daily choice to live according to your deepest values, even when the world tries to convince you that they're outdated, naive, or simply unfashionable. If you've ever stood alone for what you believe, if you've ever been judged for choosing substance over style, know that you're not alone. The world needs more people willing to wear their authentic selves, even when others laugh. Because in the end, it's not about the clothes we wear or the possessions we accumulate. It's about the lives we touch, the work we create with our hands and hearts, and the legacy of love and integrity we leave behind. That's what Thomas taught me. That's what I hope I've taught Ethan. And that, more than any furniture or fortune, is what will remain when we're gone. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who might need to be reminded of their own worth. Because sometimes, hearing another woman's journey helps us feel less alone in our own.